elsewhere is, what I perceive to be the supreme accomplishment of our civilization has been that alienation. The culturing process, as I've said here so many times, with the systematic construction of a self-reinforcing edifice of belief. Self-reinforcing is very important. This has done its work so well that, by and large, we behave as though at long last we've achieved total emancipation from nature, total independence from evolutionary process and from ecological process. This is the ego trip that we're in. And this state of mind, I do believe, is particularly evident in cities, and nowhere more evident than in the modern aspects of city, the current aspects, such as the harbor front. This is what I was talking about. So I'm calling this the human megalomania. The megalomania being a fantasy of omnipotence. And that fantasy of omnipotence is nowhere so highly developed as it is in cities. Now, megalomania, of course, is a technical term for a particular condition, a psychopathological condition, and I use it advisedly. How else, I asked the urban planners, forgive me, Charles, how else, I asked the urban planners, to describe a condition of mind that could celebrate that great erection down there, the erection on the harbor front, of the world's tallest freestanding monument to vulgarity, as I've chosen to call it. Or how else but a psychopathological condition could celebrate that scrotum that's now being appended to it. I mean, what else could you call a baseball park with a lid on it? I believe that indoor ball is perverse and unnatural. It's perverse and it's unnatural. But of course, all status symboling, as you've heard me say before, is perverse and unnatural also. These monstrosities, like that tower and that ballpark, are, in my view, exercises in inter-urban status competition, symbolic status competition. Now the good news, I reminded these chaps, is that status competition is not part of our biology, so that's good news. It's part of our culture. And the genetic engineers notwithstanding it, it's a hell of a sight easier to modify our culture than it is to modify our biology. Our culture is our own creation. Surely to heaven we can do something about that. Our biology is not our own creation. But I feel that our animalness is alive and well, thank you very much, in spite of our persistent denials of it, and in spite of our persistent, what I cheerfully call self-mutilation in the psychological sense. So I see that indoor ballpark as a pretty good example of this self-induced alienation. I see it as a containing bubble. Remember, Castaneda used to talk about the bubble of perception in which we live. The ballpark is a lake bubble, a great echo chamber of our own creations, where we can feel secure from all influences except those that we select from an inventory of our own manufacture. This is the critical part. We won't have to hear the wind, obviously, or hear the rain, or even the gulls, and Dave Winfield's gulls. We won't have to, taste the mist off the lake or taste the sunshine. We won't have to smell the way rain smells on the grass and on the dirt track around the infield. We won't have to see the clouds, of course, either. We won't even have to check which way the flags are streaming in the interest of our pool hitters, because there won't be any streaming flags because there won't be any breeze. There'll be artificial blowers to have the flag stream during the national anthem, that's all. Because remember that the flag streaming, remember how important authority is to domesticated animals. The flags are very significant indeed. And the footing, of course, will be colored green, but it won't have any earthworms in it, or little June beetles, or vegetable little thistles, or anything like that, because it'll be sterile. It'll be abiotic. The bubble will be utterly self-contained, and it will be perverse and unnatural, as I suggest. But in its perversity and its unnaturalness, it will be a microcosm of high urban civilization, will it not? Now, the delusion of environmental self-sufficiency is an interesting one. I think it may be the most ironical of all human delusions. R.D. Laing, remember what he said. Human beings seem to have an almost unlimited capacity to deceive themselves, and to deceive themselves into taking their own lies for truth. You'll remember that line in that book. I believe that we've actually traveled so far in our cultural self-deceit, to use this term, that we actually believe that we don't any longer have any need for sensory stimulation beyond that we provide ourselves, mediated, of course, by our machines, televisions and so on. No need for any sensory information or experience, or sensory experience that's not of human origin. This is the great accomplishment in the urban scene. And here, as I say, I've said this before, that my admiration for us may be greater than that of very many urban humanists, because I don't think any other species could possibly would not tolerate confinement in an echo chamber in which all sensory information, all, comes from a single source, itself. This is madness. It couldn't survive. So in our survival, in spite of steadfastly maintained sensory undernutrition, I think we're pretty remarkable, actually. Now, remember, though, that as domesticated animals will tolerate an awful lot. Domesticated animals have a much higher tolerance for psychological deprivation than wild animals do, as I covered a while back. Even so, survival in high civilization, I think, is indisputably a singular achievement, a unique achievement. But back to the cost accounting. I'm greatly oversimplifying, and you'll forgive me with your backgrounds in psych, those of you, but for the sake of time, there have been lots of experiments in SD, sensory deprivation, lots and lots and lots. Especially they ran so many before the moon shot, the space race. They shut up volunteers in empty rooms that have no sensory stimulus at all, or reduced to minimum. And the most common effects of that, as I'm sure you know, after a period of time, and not terribly long either, are delusions and hallucinations. This is what seems to happen every time under those conditions. Apparently what happens, our internal image-making apparatus keeps throwing up meaningless pictures in a search for incoming sensory impressions that, of course, never come. Perception being a matching process, of a stimulus coming in from the outside together with an image that we already have in inventory, and that's how we perceive something. So we get a series of images without context, because we're throwing up these images, but there's nothing external with which to match. And I believe that to be analogous to the common experience in the sensory malnourished contemporary urban scene. I don't think it's stretching it to say that, to suggest that sensory malnutrition of an entire society may result in shared delusions, maybe even institutionalized delusions. Perhaps that's what cultures are, I suggest. Lang doesn't, but I do. Maybe that's what cultures are. I mentioned the delusion of omnipotence. There's another delusion that somebody, and I can't remember what it is, I wish I could remember who said it first. It's been called the apple of God's eye delusion. I like that one. And there are lots more, including the assumed divine right over the biosphere and all that stuff. I think the only antidote to our pathological self-induced isolation within this humanistic echo chamber is for us to retrieve, as Shepard and I keep saying, retrieve the willingness to acknowledge the existence of, and the willingness to receive sensory information from extra-human sources. We must be able to hear the wind. We just must. And I have plenty of company, of course, in those views. And this comes right back to what we talked about before when it comes to the importance of these kinds of inputs, sensory inputs, in the development of children. We've covered all that before. The ontogenic necessity of the childhood experience of extra-human sensory information, if you like, or experience, which turns out, that experience then turns out literally to be experience of the child's own biological being, which he can only experience with biological stimulus from outside. The operative word, of course, being experience. I know I'm being repetitive. But it's awfully important. We're not talking about clinical detached observation. We're talking about experience. And I reckon that all young animals require this, whether it's moose calves or wolf cubs or our children, baby bears, whatever, apparently need the sensory experience of, not the intellectual experience, the sensory experience of information coming in from non-bears, non-caribou, whatever they are, external to their own species. Other animals, it doesn't matter what it is, other animals, weather, other veggies, it doesn't matter what it is, the seasons, the temperature. This isn't an exercise in abstraction. See, it's direct sensory, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it's fundamental. It's sensory ingestion, literal ingestion, Paul Shepard says, of the total natural context. So the young sensate being, which has not incorporated into its living experience information from outside its own society or species, matures in an incomplete, poorly adaptive psychological condition. Now, as I said earlier in the year, guess who has this incomplete, poorly adaptive psychological condition? Well, of course, it's domesticated animals, all of them. It's their psychological incompleteness, see, that makes it possible for us to manipulate them the way that we do, to take charge of them and be seen as their boss. And we keep them that way by screening them from outside influences. We steadfastly do this. We don't want our dogs out there mucking around with wolves. In terms of the cultural prosthesis, you see that the urban analogy is obvious, I think. I think it's crystal clear. So anyway, the title of this whole thing, of this conference, was Are Our Cities Killing Us or Fulfilling Our Dreams? And I thought that was they're certainly not killing us, on the contrary. But in order to function at all in those kind of conditions, which I see as unhealthy and unnatural, we have to make trade-offs, and this is what we do every day. We have to systematically sustain and reinforce this insulation or alienation, this isolation from extra-human sensory influence, and that's what we do. We have to maintain our domesticated, estrangement, I guess, from our own biological being as individuals. So I suggested to them that this is the CIP I'm talking about. We're living in a hallucinogenic house of mirrors, is what I called it. Much horrifying. The top city planner was sitting about 6 foot in front of me, didn't like that. Hallucinogenic house of mirrors of our own creation, see, and of our own design and of our own execution. But the happy thought, as I keep saying, is that none of this flows from our biology. It's artificially contrived, and it means it's subject to adjustment if it's artificial, because cultures change and ideas change. As we know, ideologies change, even dreams change. I guess the Toronto waterfront as it presently exists in the indoor ballpark and all that stuff are the fulfillment of somebody's dream. But I reckon that I have a feeling for at least the experiential and ontogenic sensory crucible out of which those dreams arose. But it can be turned around, I think. We may be living in a metaphysical dream world, but we're still alive, we're still animals, and the shepherd and I persist in saying we have nothing to lose. We can't lose our biology, we have nothing to lose but our civilized institutional crutches. So, having said that, I observe that as external, yeah?
I'm just curious as to the general reaction of the planners.
Oh, that's shock and horror. Shock and horror. Sorry, they told them I weren't. They didn't pay me anything, so they got freebies. So anyhow, after observing that in this sensory undernutrition process in the urban industrial scene, as these external stimuli fall, the internal image-making apparatus still goes on, indeed increases. It's though searching for some external signal, it's scanning almost, with which to match one of our internal images, all right. But in the extreme cases, nothing coming in at all, nothing to match with, and the internal images therefore are without meaning. This is the important part. They're meaningless. There's nothing. And we can never have a prior image in infantry to match nothingness, see? Because we've never had an image of nothingness set in place, all right? We've never experienced nothingness until we get into the experimental chamber. And we cannot, I wonder why we cannot experience nothingness. Well, my feeling is it's because our culture cannot allow us to accept nothingness. It's a no-no. And that particular thread, of course, I left dangling in the earlier presentation, and I'll pick that up now. Now, Lang, we keep coming back to Lang, but this other line that I love from him, a wonderful takeoff statement for all this. He says, "We are afraid to approach the fathomless and bottomless groundlessness of everything." There's nothing to be afraid of. The ultimate reassurance and the ultimate terror. If you've been hearing me during this term, you know that I believe the ultimate terror has cultural roots, not biological ones, and I believe that there's nothing inherent in us, nothing innate in us, that could cause us to fear nothingness. It takes no reflection. But I don't think there's anything in our being that makes us fear nothingness. But cultures, of course, have everything to fear from the concept of nothingness. Because, as I'll try to show, what nothingness actually implies is what? Meaninglessness. And a universe of meaninglessness is a universe without purpose. Okay. I've been having a great hassle about our thirst and search for meaning with a student who's engaged in our major paper right now. It's an interesting thing. Is it a fundamental human need to have meaning? Well, I don't know. Fundamental cultural need for sure. I don't know beyond that. But from the cultural point of view, a universe without purpose has terrifying implications for cultures. Because cultures, especially I would reckon our own culture, rests finally and fundamentally on human purpose and human meaning in the universe, in the cosmos. Now those thoughts like that, of course, as you well know, can be quite liberating to the individual, at least I find them so. But they're absolutely terrifying to the institutionalized belief system and all of its vested appurtenances, such as schools. For purposes of this, let's look at a human culture, any human culture, doesn't matter, as an edifice of belief. We know that. Beliefs, of course, change, so there's nothing permanent or immortal about them. Even poor old Descartes, who gets plenty of lumps in this course and plenty of lumps in other courses, didn't really introduce anything, absolutely unchangeable. What he did, in fact, was write, as I've sometimes called it, a really neat three-word title for the area of concentration of the scientific, technical, and industrial revolutions. That's what it was. It was a lovely title for those works. His abstract, as you know, in less than 100 words, went like this. There's an essential difference between spirit and matter, between thinking and substance. All things must fall into one of these two categories. And once in one or the other category, no thing can influence anything in the other category, and none can partake of the other's attributes. And of course, he believed in absolute perfection. Now, apart from Descartes' passionate affair with the notion and with his own mind, I can't really see what was so new about that. Even then. We had perfection for a hell of a long time before René Descartes. We'd had absolute good and absolute evil. We'd had the personification of both since at least the 3rd century, maybe earlier. We'd enjoyed this species of moral dualism, with an infusion, of course, of Christianity, right through all the early and medieval heresies, as well as the successful orthodoxies. There was nothing new about dualism, that's all I'm saying. Nothing new about that. Now, once you have absolute good and absolute evil, and we've had them since the beginning of civilization, I think it becomes possible to categorize a whole lot of other things once you've got absolute good and evil there. Well, I did good with my left hand. I like that. Sinister. That's good. Good and evil. It wasn't intentional. Anyway, it's not difficult to guess how Descartes' mind matter, or spirit/flesh, line up under the headings of good and evil. If mind is good, then reason is good. Reason is good, then non-reason is not good. Emotion is non-reason and therefore is not good. Orthodoxy is good, heresy is the opposite. Spirit is good, body is corruption. Life is good, death then must be evil. Since we alone have mind and spirit and reason, that which does not have mind and spirit and reason has to fall down on the other side, doesn't it? Non-man does not have mind and spirit and reason. Nature is matter and flesh and heresy and death. Man is purpose and meaning in the universe. Nature is meaninglessness, very much in R.D. Laing's sense. Nature, then, is the fathomless and bottomless groundlessness of everything. Nature, then, is Laing's ultimate terror, I suggest. Not nature as daffodils and butterflies now. Nature as the dark, our own dark interior selves. Nature as our animalness, I think is fair to say. Neil says, fear of our own biology. And fear of our own biology may well be at the root of the general resentment and fear of sociobiology, I think. This is what's behind that, or at least in part. Fear of our genetic roots, fear of our biological roots. Especially fear of the genetic, biological roots of our behavior. This is greatly feared. And why do we resent and fear the biological roots of our own behavior? Because our own biology is beyond our control. We're stuck with it. The most grievous insult to the humanist is his own animalness, his loss of control, his absence of control over the fact that he's a biological being. So we rationalize the fears, don't we? That's what we do. And very few do it as brilliantly as a Descartes. There aren't too many of them around. But we all do it one way or another. As you know, the motto that is stuck on the forehead of every technocrat is what? Prediction and control. And there are lots of others. That's just the most pervasive one, at least at the moment. In the modern idiom, you know, what do we say? We speak about the fear of losing our grip, don't we? I like that one. Losing our grip, losing our grasp. Interesting. You know, we grasp screwdrivers and we grasp problems. And if we lose intellectual grasp of a thing, then presumably we've lost some part of our manipulative control over that thing as well. If we lose our grip on ourselves, you know all about that. Might well wind up in even more severe sensory deprivation than we experience in a room like that. Of course, we fear a hell of a sight more than losing our grip and losing our grasp. We can shorten it. We fear losing. We fear losing from the most superficial level, let's say, in a competitive marketplace, something like that, to the most fundamental level in the lifelong battle against biological process itself. To die, or to become extinct, is to have been a loser. Individuals and cultures, as well as species, are born and mature and become senescent and die. And this process is feared at every one of those levels, by and large. I think it's entirely possible that of all the societies and cultures that the world has ever seen, perhaps none has been so anxiety-ridden, hag-ridden by the morbid fear of extinction as ours. Because to become extinct is to lose, if you read Darwin in a simple-minded way. Our stereotypical images of losers, we have a lot of them, and what are the ones that spring to mind? Dinosaurs, dodos, pagan animism, Neanderthal, Gibbons, Roman Empire, stuff like that. All were born losers. All declined and fell. Isn't it interesting? All declined and fell. We say this even of evolutionary process. But it can't happen here. It can't happen here. Of course, there are two ways of becoming extinct, remember. And this is interesting. One is to vanish utterly without trace. Gone, down the drain. The other is much more attractive, as gracefully and as compliantly as possible, change into something new, something more appropriate to newly prevailing environmental circumstances and indeed opportunities. The first is quite unthinkable. To go down the drain is unthinkable in every human society. It surely is, because we are not subject to extinction. And neither are cultures subject to extinction, except in hindsight, because every culture has arrived at perfection in the here and now. Or at the very least, just, it'll be tomorrow. Just on the verge of perfection. Just one more breakthrough. I wonder how many cultures have heard that and continue to hear it. One more breakthrough will be okay. The second option, to gracefully, compliantly change, evolve into something more fitting, perhaps, to the moment, turns out to be almost equally frightening somehow because of the radical fear of change. And I talked about Romer's rule before, and I'm not going to talk about that anymore. That fear of change, I think, is especially highly developed in this culture because it's the culture in which the notion of control has reached its historic apogee. No society has celebrated control the way ours does. Therefore, it is more fearful of change. I have no doubt about that. To evolve, of course, is to change if we accept the model of evolution that biology, I think, does. To evolve is to change at the whim of external forces and in a direction supplied by external forces. To evolve gracefully would be to comply, in my sense that I use the word. I use the word, it's just the Cartesian opposite of control, isn't it? Which I discussed through social behavior and all that. So to evolve is maybe consciously, maybe not consciously, but at any rate, effectively, to surrender mind and will to natural process. That's what to evolve would be. To evolve would be to surrender purpose and meaning. To surrender them to directionlessness. And what is a happier or more liberating thought, more exciting thought than directionlessness, I think? To sacrifice self to other, this requires. To submerge I, as Buber says, in thou. And that's not decently thinkable in the dominant Western Manichaean paradigm. See, it's an essential plank in the edifice of belief that we now live in, that evolution is over. Great, we celebrated its wonderful accomplishments in the past, but it's now finished. All that competition, all that elbowing, all that cut and thrust, hammering certainly went on in the past, absolutely. And we have the evidence of it in the fossil record, but now it's over because the purpose of organic evolution has now been realized. Life rules no longer apply. It's a new ballgame now since we got here, especially in the 20th century. As Teilhard mused publicly, and I'm quoting now verbatim, if the goal and the purpose of evolution were to produce mankind, as he believed it to be, it would be irrational, his word, for the ultimate creation to thereupon become extinct. That would contradict the rationale for the whole life process, because world without man is quite literally unthinkable. Okay. Also, at least in the Western intellect, or heart, I suppose, as well, it's somewhat unseemly that the stuff of a human being should undergo breakdown and subsequent recombination in the form of some of the other lesser beings. That's not a nice thing to think about. It's something less than heroic, I guess, to be reprocessed through all the beautiful series of invertebrates and plants like any other corruption. I think it'd be lovely to turn into a crocus, but that's not what my society thinks. So we have steel and concrete mausoleums, don't we? And the steel and concrete mausoleums are there to keep nature at bay, keep nature from catching us. The only conceivable cosmology for our culture then includes the persistence of our species in human form for as long as there's Earth, because Earth has no meaning without it. I think also there's a morbid fear of losing our imperial position over all other life forms. Obviously, we'll go to whatever lengths are necessary to maintain that dominance. And we do it from spraying the rose aphids to leveling the forest to dominating the biosphere. It doesn't much matter. Obviously, if we have to remain extant at any cost, then no cost is too much to pay. It follows. We'll even pay the cost of our sensory undernutrition and deprivation, our deliberate and unilateral estrangement from an alienation from our own biology. We'll pay that price too, because our ego trip is worth it. Our self-denial as sentient beings. And that, it seems to me, is an awful heavy price, but this is what we pay. But of course, as every blackmailer knows, that there's nothing that does things to prices like fear. So I see our culture as being in Bateson's double bind. Literally, the harder we struggle toward uniqueness in immortality, the tighter draws the knot of alienation. This is Bateson's classic example of the double bind. The Cartesian dichotomy, mind over matter, reinforces and is reinforced by man over nature. It's the same thing as mind over matter. mutual reinforcement against the ultimate terror. It's said, that fear can render us as individuals immobile. Maybe it can, I don't know that. But I think that the ultimate terror renders our culture immobile. Hence the slingshots that deep ecology gets daily. Doesn't react well to criticism, the humanistic worldview. In other words, I see the human immortality imperative as the cultural surrogate for the compliant evolutionary imperative. And of course, it follows that the cultural surrogate becomes, as the night the day, becomes the social reality. So I think it's the immortality imperative that, in an operational sense, effectively emasculates the environmental doomsayers, and virtually all the long-term environmental arguments. See, I think that we do entertain the ultimate terror in a theoretical or intellectual or abstract sense. We can't deny it as intellectuals, but we don't allow ourselves to feel it. That's what we don't allow. Reason over emotion, remember. And here arises just a gorgeous paradox, it seems to me. Because human immortality, species immortality, a conceptual fabrication and an emotional one, God knows, turns out to be infinitely more potent than any doomsday argument of pure reason. Descartes should be around to observe this. Even though every literate person knows that extinction is the way of evolution, that is the fundamental flow of life, and life cannot flow without it, we're different. If we're not immortal, as Tayyar suggests, if we're not immortal, then there'd be no meaning or purpose in our existence. Because immortality confers meaning and purpose, and meaning and purpose confers immortality. Okay? Which would mean, if we had no meaning or purpose, then surely there would be no meaning and purpose in the cosmos. But the absence of meaning and purpose in the cosmos would be irrational. So what I'm getting at is that the matter of rationalization, and this came up last time, I guess, didn't it, Ken? Yeah. We talked about rationalization, emotion, and reason. I want to talk about that now. If you read the fallacy, you read this in there, but I want to go over it because it fits what was going on last time. Rationalization, which is the practice of making things, problems, whatever, amenable to reason, to interpret things and problems from a rational point of view. Or to devise satisfactory, but not necessarily accurate, reasons for our behavior. That's another form of rationalization, isn't it? An explanation we can live with. We contrive to keep the ultimate terror out of sight, and thus out of mind, by means of rationalization, of the form that Kim was talking about the other day. I think that rationalizations are substitutes, then surrogates again. Jesus, the surrogates comes up a lot, doesn't it? Rationalizations are surrogates for what I would call quality, what I do call quality experience, as opposed to abstract experience. Quality experience as opposed to purely intellectual experience. And I'll try to explain that. There was a time, as you know, when knowledge was defined as the marriage of reason and experience in classical times. But thanks to Descartes, the Manichees, and especially the scientific worldview we have now today, those two components of knowledge are conceptually polarized. They've been divided instead of wedded. Reason and experience. We have rationality, which is science, and we have mysticism, which is non-science, non-rational, dare I say, qualitative experience. We have intellect as distinct from emotion, reason as distinct from feeling, and guess what? Man as distinct from nature. So man is to nature as intellect is to emotion. I think this is so. I think this is the way it works. Man is to nature as intellect is to emotion. I think this is pretty much the way it works in contemporary society. Okay. Now it seems to me that even though the cultural tradition insists on this gulf between intellect and emotion, at the same time, we feel, all of us feel, no matter how well trained we are, some strange urge, irrational, I guess, urge to seal over or close the gap. Don't we want to close that gap? I always do when I'm outdoors. I find it more difficult indoors. But that drive, I think, originates in our biology. in our animal nests, thank heavens. But we're prevented from doing that, from sealing over that gap between intellect and emotion. Culture maintains the illusion, and it must, as it were, it has a vested interest, our culture, in maintaining the illusion of a gap or a divider or a gulf, an abyss between intellect and emotion. And it does that by way of a fabricated, what I've sometimes called a diorama of beliefs and givens, and religions and philosophies and ideologies and other rationalizations. See, for purposes of the technical, scientistic society, we have to believe in the gap. We have to believe in that gap between intellect and emotion. We must, in order to function in that society. But we must at all costs be prevented from trying to experience it. And of course, we cannot experience the gap because the gap does not exist. But the system is most anxious for us to believe that it exists. Okay? Now, in the case of the institutionalized gap between human and nature, on the other hand, culture urges us to experience the institutionalized gap between human and nature. Why? In order to shore up the desired belief system. That's why. So we're offered, in order to experience that gap, we're offered pre-selected fragments that illustrate the gap. As it turns out, the illusion of experience of a gap between yourself and nature is provided by the exact same set of beliefs and givens and religions, philosophies and ideologies, such as the scientific assertions about human uniqueness being self-perception, let's say, that we know we've shot down through that nice little speaking chimp that we talked about. Here again, rationalization is substituted for the whole experience. Whole experience must not be so. We substitute a rationalization which keeps things orderly. The whole experience, remember, the whole experience that we have when we're in a good frame of mind and body is idea plus quality. When we add quality to an idea, the gap between human and nature vanishes. There is no gap. I see this institutionalized gap between intellect and emotion and human and nature as a symbolic expression of root fears. It could only be fear that could sustain it so aggressively and so firmly, fiercely, and tyrannically over time. Very often symbols, metaphoric expressions, turn out to be substitutes, don't they, for that which is not expressible. So we put a symbol, a metaphor in for something that we cannot express in words. Most often we substitute metaphor or institutionalized images of some kind for that which is not understandable. If I can't understand it, I'll substitute a metaphor. If I can't manage it, I will also substitute a metaphor. So metaphor is substituted for that which is neither understandable nor, much more importantly in our society, manageable. As often as not, rationalization then is substituted for experience. Why? Out of fear of the experience. Because, lo and behold, the experience may well bring down the whole deck of cards. The belief house of cards, I mean. So when we approach the brink of this pit of ultimate terror, knowledge is no longer reason plus experience, but knowledge becomes reason plus rationalization. And that is the intellectual environment in which we live. Take, for example, except in the creative world, I mean, I do understand. I mean in the technocratic universe. Take, for example, and I've written about this in the fallacy, but I'll discuss it again because it fascinates. I cannot have my last presentation without discussing the uniquely human immortal soul. I grant that it's uniquely human as a concept. There's no problem with that. I think that paranoia is confined to one species only. I've mentioned the immortality imperative. I don't think there's an individual immortality imperative. I don't think each of us entertains that. We know better than that on purely empirical grounds, and I know better than you guys do. But we have in reserve the mind/matter and the spirit/flesh concepts to fall back on, just in case we do entertain a morbid fear of our personal extinction. So we rationalize a comfortable continuity that we call the afterlife, and we also rationalize the vehicle for its attainment or achievement. Now this one is really neat. This one has fascinated me, always. Because no contrary objective evidence can ever be marshaled and brought to bear. I can't prove we don't have a soul and I won't live in the hereafter. How can I prove that objectively and quantitatively? I cannot. And neither can I marshal any contrary experience that I can use against it. Can't do that either. It can never be disproven, in other words. It's the flip side of have you stopped beating your wife. You can't bring evidence to bear on it. For me, it disposes forever of the institutionalized gap between reason and emotion. Of course, reason and emotion, by positing the immortal soul, and reason and emotion turn out to be interchangeable after all. Do they not? An extraordinary concept, soul. Extraordinary in the afterlife. I've been wondering if it just might be related somehow to our domestication. I don't know that. But I think it might be related to our loss of place. I just think it might. Both individual place and collective place, social place and ecologic place. And all that implies. I don't know about this, but I've got some suspicions. You know, even the poor old derelict, poor old wino out in the beach someplace, even if he has no place on earth here, there'll sure be a place for him in the sweet by and by. And this we know, so it's okay, he'll be all right eventually. Maybe there's no place for the domesticated being in the here and now, then maybe there's a place for the domesticated being in the then and hereafter. Well, you might ask, what about other domesticated animals? I don't know. But I do know that I've seen raw fear shown by many domesticated animals. Raw fear, physical fear. I've never seen raw physical fear shown by wild animals, strangely enough. I've seen avoidance and all that, but never raw, naked fear like you see in a dog or a horse. Now in Western, or a human, now in Western tradition, post-Renaissance, there's an obviously fundamental vested interest in preserving reason from the inroads of feeling. This we know, we've already said this. The best example, of course, being value-free science. We must protect our objective reason from feeling. There's a concomitant vested interest in preserving our species, man, from the inroads of feeling. I think it's two facets of the same phenomenon, two aspects of it. The buffer between reason and feeling, and between man and nature, is, as I've said, of cultural fabrication. The slash is a cultural contrivance. It's a rational response. The slash is entirely rational. It's a rational response to an irrational fear. The fear has no foundation, but the slash is rational. It's a response to the fear. And the fear, what is the fear of? The fear is of experiencing nature, our own nature. That's what the fear is. Now, the fear of the experience of nature is cast in as many ways as there are people and institutions. One way to see our fear of nature, and it's a way that's one of my favorites, is our fear of disorganization, our fear of chaos, our fear of emotion. Emotion is nature, damn it. The fear of nature, which is emotion, eroding the integrity of the reasonable objective edifice that we believe each of us is, or eroding the reasonable edifice that is the techno-culture, the techno-scientific culture. Ecology may or may not be subversive, as some people have said, but emotion sure as hell is in our society. I don't know how many faculty members around here get hate mail. I get hate mail. I'm one of the few people you know who gets hate mail, and I get lots of it. And I get quite a bit of it, mostly from the blood sports, the bloodletting subculture, because I'm always going off at the mouth about that, and always getting asbestos mail back. And the most frequent theme, whenever I publish an article or speak or at television or whatever against the bloodletting for jollies, the most frequent theme is that I have absolutely no rational argument to offer, and that as a result of my intellectual, rational bankruptcy, I resort sneakily to purely emotional appeals. This is essentially what I get in every letter. I'm sneakily resorting to pulling heartstrings when I have no when I have no objective evidence to bring to bear on it. So I'm using emotion sneakily, and some of these letters, in fact, all of them are very, very angry indeed. Pretty emotional, actually. My emotional orientation, as these people see it, with regard to killing and maiming for fun, my emotional orientation comes close to being a crime against nature, and I've heard them actually say so in their letters. Human nature, of course, is what's meant. Well, what in the world is this pejorative use of the word emotion all about, I wonder? All of you trained in science know exactly what I'm talking about. Even the most casual analysis, you see, of my mail seems to show that emotion evokes fear. Why are we so afraid of emotion? That's a fantastic, wonderful question. Why are we so afraid of emotion? Well, I guess our fear of emotion is fear of the chaotic. I think that it is. Because to be emotional means to set aside organization, doesn't it? It means you suspend reason and you allow yourself to drift passively, toward disorganization, you can just see yourself flying out toward that chaos or quality to intrude sufficiently to threaten the edifice of pure reason. And this is the morbid fear of the culture. Value-free science again, value-free science cannot wax emotional, except in its defense. And especially the experimental labs. I won't get onto that. But I do think it's fair to say, though, that each of us here does fear personal disorder to some extent. We've all experienced it. We all fear it to some extent. We all value our reasonable universes. Mark and I were talking about it just before the class. We were going to fly apart or not. We all value our reasonable universes. So I suppose it's natural for the proponents of the, let's say, of the fur trade to attempt to whip up the public emotion in order to call attention to the irrational emotional display of those who are against the fur trade. You saw this in your work at the farm. They try to hype emotion in order to counter our emotion about the wrongness of, say, of the fur trade. And of course, since emotions can't be explained, rationally anyway, this way, the opponent of the fur trade is once again saddled with the usual impossible burden of proof. And I say usual impossible burden of proof because the wildlifer, the lifelong wildlifer such as myself, knows all about impossible burdens of proof. And this is what much of deep ecology is about. We're sick of it. So we don't even know what emotions are. I don't think we know what emotions are. We know that they exist. But you can only show the existence of emotion not on paper, not in a computer, but in a context, and that context must be experiential. Emotion can only be shown in experiential context. You can't show it by rational explication and reduction. Because there's no such thing as an emotion in isolation. There cannot be. It has to have an experiential context of some kind or another. And thus it is that feelings are, for the moment anyway, eliminated from the conventional model of knowledge. And what we've had is the techno-scientific boulderization, I guess, of the old notion of reason plus experience equaling knowledge into reason plus rationalization equaling knowledge in the techno-culture. Now this is what's made this awful double bind into which I believe nature preservation has fallen. I see it as the crucible out of which shallow environmentalism has come. The technical fix within the system, don't rock the boat, that particular thing. In the desperate attempt to show at any cost that we're not emotional, we're terribly important to us to show that we're not emotional, that we're entirely reasonable. We mount any number of reasonable arguments, don't we? Such as EIA, such as costs/benefit, etc. See, we accepted, we the nature preservationists I mean now, we accepted the burden of sharing and projecting and communicating, I suppose, the techno-scientific worldview, which obviously, ironically, paradoxically, guarantees the death of wild nature. By purveying it, we are sealing the fate of wild nature. wildlife preservation is not allowed to be presented as wildlife preservation. It has to be cloaked in reasonable argument. Those who are in the biological conservation class know all about that. It has to be presented as resource conservation in order for communication to occur within the edifice of reason. Because wildlife preservation is for you know who. It's for cranks, nuts, emotional, intuitive people, irrational people, women. In other words, the fear of, I tell you, it is true. In other words, the fear of appearing to be emotional requires us to fabricate our own rationalizations for nature preservation, lest we invite the terrible censure of the technocratic age by committing the one unpardonable sin, irrationality. That is unpardonable in the techno-scientistic culture. And that essentially is how shallow environmentalism got into the mess that it's in, into the fix that it's in, and is struggling vainly to get out of it. But as Arlene has pointed out, it cannot escape. It cannot escape, as long as it remains within the paradigm. Now, if, as I suspect may be the case, the root fear is of disorganization, and I reckon that it is, then we have to maintain appropriate vigilance in the interest of the general security, don't we? You see, in spite of itself, the conceptual edifice also has emotions, but it just denies them. Denial being the truck and trade of the way we function. Because the edifice of rationality knows, in spite of itself, it knows, out of reason and experience, that it's vulnerable. The emperor knows, just like everybody else, what his new clothes are made of. He knows that. But the emperor has enough sycophants, and so does the edifice of reason have enough sycophants to spread the desired construction of reality. So the emperor has orthodoxies, which spawn heresies, and the threats of reprisal that surround and sustain the orthodoxies. If there's no duality between man and nature, then man is no more than an animal. And you know what that means? Well, it means, among other things, no more uniqueness in the matter of immortal souls. And that does disquieting things to the organization of the edifice, doesn't it? Well, we've mentioned before, here in this course, the conceptual trick, perceptual trick that I told you about, called pseudospeciation. You don't napalm people, you napalm gooks. That's pseudospeciation. If you can see your human opponent not as human, but as some other species, always, incidentally, subhuman, that other species. Never non-human, always subhuman. Then civilized rules of procedure no longer apply. We covered that. I suppose that the Nazi medical experiments were examples of that. Jews were not only non-human, but subhuman. As we've seen, the rhesus monkeys, we know all about rhesus monkeys in the labs, and the white rabbits also have a necessary role in the advancement of the higher good through the experimental labs in cosmetics and so forth. You hear a lot about animal behavior, don't we, in inverted commas. The rapist or the murderer in the dock, my lord, he behaved like an animal. There's a terrible and depressing bar up in Inuvik that's always full of drunken natives. And it's called the zoo, and even the natives call it the zoo, and so on. The drunken native or the murderer have at least temporarily lost control, haven't they? They behave like animals. Says the prosecutor, my lord, he turned into an animal. It may very well be that the rational fear of emotion is much more intimately related to the fear of nature than we like to think. I think that maybe it is. As I pointed out lots of times, it's always that the rational being occupies the apex of the power pyramid because it's assumed to be in the universal nature of things that reason is more important than non-reason, and that ergo man is more important than non-man. Simple as that. I reckon that fear of the disorganization of the power structure is just as profound as the individual personal fear of personal disorganization. Maybe more, for all I know. Since it's institutionalized, maybe more. Fear of disorganization, and we usually express fear of disorganization as fear of breakdown, I guess, and exploding. That is fear of the loss of control at its root, it seems to me. Organization is just a concept, but fear of loss of control is what it is. I don't think we need to elaborate that any further as far as individuals are concerned. We like to keep in control of what we're doing. But I do suggest that it's the identical fear of loss of control that sustains the Cartesian man-nature duality, intellect-emotion duality. I think it's the same problem, because that which is not under control is threatening. That doesn't really matter what it is that's getting out of control, whether it's the crows in the fields or the spruce bloodworm or the backyard crabgrass. It doesn't matter. It's always seen as a threat. It's out of control. Got to get it back under control again somehow. Whatever it is, control it. If it's out of control, it's threatening. There's a little anecdote that I tell. Years ago, I was up in Newvik, and I was walking around with a friend, and he said, "John, we got to do something about all these ravens. There's so many ravens." I said, "Why do we have to do something about all the ravens?" He said, "Well, look around you, man. There's so many of them. They're out of control. They're perfect." He said, "Just a lot of them, so we got to do something." Okay, God didn't mean that many ravens to be. Anyway, loss of control is the abdication of power. Okay, and power is very important in an urban industrial techno-scientistic society. The Marxists and others would like to see power redistributed. The anarchists, at least some of them, would like to see power dissolved. Well, it always says in the fine print, power to the people, though, after all these arguments. I know of no power in nature. It does, Mike. I know of no power in nature. So the anarchistic goal would seem more appropriate to me, but not Murray's thing anymore. But in our society, for the present anyhow, loss of control means abdication of power, means chaos. I think this is what this means. You see, the universe is obviously natural, and the universe is orderly. Since it's natural, it must be orderly. If the universe were not orderly, we couldn't do physics. Now, of course, we're not being unable to do theoretical physics, but most physics we couldn't do if the universe were not orderly. If the natural universe is orderly, then disorder is unnatural. The universe operates according to absolute laws, ultimate laws. Therefore, chaos, if there are laws of the universe, then chaos is immoral. Damn it. Like, it's easy to see chaos as immoral. That which cannot be controlled, meaning managed or manipulated or organized in some way, categorized, may be seen as both unnatural and immoral. Anomalous, even psychopathic. Nature is psychopathic. Disorganized, out of control. The anomalous and the psychopathic and the unnatural turns out to be that unmanageable animal side of us that, as I say, surfaces in criminal court every day. The unmanageable is also, of course, parts of nature. Hurricanes and floods and rock slides in winter, and cancer and death, and all other things have not yet been boxed into the management chart of the human organization. And so it's easy to see those ravens up in Nunavik as defying, they're thumbing their noses at universal order and at us, by extension, because we represent universal order and we can't have those ravens. So assuming that we resent and fear disorder, our society does, the loss of control, the breakdown of authority, the weakening or collapse of the system we fear, then maybe we're coming closer to the fear of death. I don't know. I postulate the fear of death is not innate in us, but is learned, culturally conditioned. I've observed very old people who welcome it and those who fear it. It doesn't seem to be biological. It doesn't seem to be even logical. As I pointed out earlier, there doesn't appear to be any individual immortality imperative, but there does appear to be a species one. There does indeed. And most certainly, categorically, there's a cultural one. Our culture sees to it that the species imperative, perhaps especially the cultural imperative, kept solidly locked in place. It can't do anything about individual mortality, obviously, but what it can do, and does do, is instill and maintain in a great many individuals the deep and abiding fear of mortality. It does. I do not believe that there's any fear in us of the experience of death. I do believe that fear of the experience of death is created and sustained entirely culturally, which means rationally. Same thing applies. death, I was listening with the greatest of interest to the, I've heard it too many times lately, but on the Mackenzie King program. Death is the final sting, the ultimate victory of uncontrollable, unmanageable, immoral, chaotic nature, from which experience we're snatched at the final exhalation by the rationalization of the immortal soul. This is why the preacher can stand up and say, "Death, where is thy sting?" Fooled you at the last minute. "Grave, where is thy victory?" Power didn't change hands after all, did it? Spirit over flesh, man over nature. It's just as simple as that. Again, I quote the Lang quote that I like so much. Human beings seem to have an almost unlimited capacity to deceive themselves and to deceive themselves into taking their own lives for truth. If we can find no meaning in things, then by God we create meaning. We must have meaning. And in rationalizing our way out of meaninglessness, Lang then sees us as magicians. Lang goes on to say man is a magician in rationalizing out of this bind. I know of no magic quite so potent as the denial of nature through the denial of death. The afterlife is the ultimate rabbit out of the hat, in my view, in terms of rationalization. It really is magic. I can think of no rationalization so powerful in sustaining this duality, the man-nature duality, and indeed sustaining the reason-emotion duality, because it's the conclusive denial of the role of experience in knowledge, I think. As I've said, rationalization is substituted for experience out of fear of the experience, clearly. And in denying experience, we effectively deny everything outside the social construction of reality. Guess what? Sensory deprivation again, I think. The good news, of course, is that the denial of experience, and now I'll unblushingly equate experience with nature, the denial of experience, denial of nature, is the creation and the fabrication of cultures. It hasn't any more reality in the external sense than any other of the strange, bizarre notions that we're subjected to. And the even better news, I think, is that culture does not and cannot deny all experience, because people keep right on experiencing and people keep right on dreaming in spite of the bloody tyranny of the culture. Dreaming's a common experience, the existence of which simply cannot be denied. So in that sense, at least, emotion and feeling have to be admitted into the model of reality. We don't need to rationalize them. We've got to admit that they're there. But we seem to need to rationalize almost everything else. I'm not sure about this, but it seems to me that the need to rationalize everything within reach is a particularly Western aberration, a particularly Western techno-scientistic aberration. I don't think it's necessary in all other cultures. It doesn't seem to crop up, at least with such consistent brutality, in other cultures as it does in ours. Of course, they're all being poisoned by ours anyway, but it doesn't seem to in their original form. Because rationalization, after all, is what? Rationalization is force-fitting, is what it is. And force-fitting is what we do every day of our lives with ideas. And the opposite of force-fitting seems to me to be that thing that I keep calling acceptance or compliance. It's the opposite of force-fitting. Why force it if it doesn't fit? Now, the urge to force something that doesn't fit, I leave to you. That's what we're talking about. Now, compliance has a lot of implications, of course, and I've mentioned before. For one thing, it means abdicating power. As I say, it means willful, willing, conscious abdication of power. It does not mean abandoning organization, I don't think, but it does mean abandoning hierarchy. It doesn't mean chaos, I don't think, but it certainly means the dissolution of linear order. Guess where we talked about linear order before we talked about hidden domestication? Compliance disposes of rank. And I believe and hope, I believe, that it restores place. And for one-to-one causality, obviously, it substitutes mutuality. hate no word quite so much as systems component. For component, compliant substitutes participant, damn it. Compliance is whole. It's not fragments or aggregates. It's whole. So compliance is organism, not system. Not system. Organism. So all that sounds nice, I know, but its implications for the contemporary social construction of reality are enormous, if it were ever to take root anywhere, since it's fluid, not stable, and since it's experiential as opposed to reasonable. It may be frightening, and indeed it is frightening. But that, of course, is just in a socio-cultural way. Societies and cultures do change. Every time somebody writes a book, something a little bit changes. They fear change. You can't stop it. They eventually do change. And, of course, what is history but a list of cultures changing over time? What is terrifying even at one time is no longer terrifying in another. And what was not terrifying in an earlier time turns out to be terrifying now, like that. So assuming that most, if not all, of our fears are culturally induced, and I happen to believe they are, and assuming as I do that socio-cultural learned fears are a whole lot more highly developed than individual inherent fears, if indeed there are any, what then is the ultimate terror? What does Lang mean when he says the ultimate terror? The ultimate reassurance and the ultimate terror. Death? Well, surely not. Not for the individual anyhow, but certainly for the culture. I think the culture has a morbid fear of death. It's death. Disorganization? Ultimate terror? Chaos? Loss of power? Loss of control? Sure. You bet that's one part of the ultimate terror. Fear of experience? Terror of emotion? You bet, in our society. Fear of sensory options? I wonder. Fear of new options coming into that damn hooded ballpark. Fear of intellectual options as well as sensory options and sensual options. I reckon there are vested interests that fear intellectual options, which is why we have tenure, isn't it? Is fear of our inner animal being, fear of our animalness, I'm pretty sure. It's interesting that nature, isn't it, is all of these things. Nature is every single one of these items. It's the uncontrollable, the unmanageable, the unpredictable, the inner. The inner. The ultimate terror, then, I guess, is nature, even though Lang doesn't say so. And what's nature? Well, I think it turns out to be acceptance and compliance and a sense of place. Maybe it's also fathomlessness and meaninglessness, and I kind of hope it is. And why should a complying, accepting sense of place be the ultimate terror, then? Because it negates the Cartesian rationalization. It negates the dualistic assumptions that our entire scientistic technoculture is built upon. The sense of place, negates scientism. And the sense of place, as expressed in so-called deep ecology or critical environmentalism, whatever you want to call it, deeply offends most vested interests who would like to maintain the perceptual bubble. And after all those assertions, it's not bad. You've heard a lot of assertions, so in part of a hypothesis I had at the end. But I think it ties up the domestication, their implication here for the domestication, and I hope for the whole course, for the whole term as we went along. Most of the things I think have been tied into that. Thank God for R.D. Lang. I gather that man is such a nod. Is he still alive? I guess he's... Huh? I think so. He was here, a few years ago. I never did get a chance to meet him. I would have loved that. But I gather he's such a maniac that he doesn't communicate very well. And they had a big session here. Apparently it was wonderful. I couldn't go. But he's dense. He's dense, apparently, and speaking in metaphors all the time is very hard to understand him. Would have been nice. I missed that.
I think the latest
issue of Omni magazine has an interview with him.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, and in the introduction, the interviewer says something about Lang was so slow to respond that he kept feeling like asking him if he's all right.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, he reviews a lot. Yeah, that's right, yeah. He's still there, yeah, I know. Current one, I'll have a look. Yeah. Okay, I don't know, I'm not quite sure what this was about. I guess it was about sensory undernutrition, wasn't it? So besides Rosemary, who I know is going to pick up the flag, torch, Marnie? Okay. Any comment to this? Yeah.
Oh, well, like you said this was the last lecture I saw going on the impression. Next week was the last, it's not.
This is the last formal presentation from me, the last time I'm going to go on. That's all. Yeah, we'll meet next week. No, we'll just kind of summarize and have a wrap-up round table next time, that's all.
Next Thursday, or just?
No, next, whatever day today is. What day is today?
Thursday.
Next Thursday, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll meet again, but we'll meet at 8:30 instead of 8. We're going on summer hours anyway tomorrow, or Monday. So it'll be 8:30, Adrian, not 8. And we'll only go on till 9:30 anyway. We'll have to do the course evaluation and all that crap. So we'll just have a chat and then break it up.
I'll probably forget it. I'm afraid.
Well, I'll join you for a coffee then.